McKenzie, you were, until very recently, Workday's first ever Global Chief Information Officer, and you also held a similar position in the past at Amgen. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about Workday and how did you wind up at a company like that coming out of Amgen, and what did you learn that you would be eager to apply in your next iteration of your professional career?
Sure, happy to do that. So I'll start with, I resembled Simi's remark. When I was at Amgen, I'd been in the life sciences industry for almost 30 years, primarily in IT roles, and I was the CIO at that company. The last 2 to 3 years in that role, I had the honor and the privilege to work with Cal and Simi and others to build out the digital health organization at Amgen, and at the same time lead a cross-functional work stream to help us better understand how we unlocked innovation that was at that time happening just within R&D or within the formulation science or device science part of our manufacturing organization, so that we would look at it across the entire product development life cycle and do that with an eye towards the patient journey. And what I realized is I didn't know what I was doing, right? I'd grown up being an IT person, not a product engineering person. So when Workday approached me outside of healthcare, Workday, for those of you that don't know, is a disruptor in the software space surrounding human capital management and finance systems. The people that built PeopleSoft started Workday in the cloud, and it was growing hyperscale, and they needed a CIO. And I thought, what a great opportunity for me to step away from healthcare and go get my master's degree or my PhD in how you run a software company. So I spent 3.5 years there with the specific aim of doing a good job in helping them build that organization, helping them, quite frankly, with their own digital strategy. They've been around now for 14 years. They've grown like crazy, and what got them there is not going to keep them where they need to be. And at this point, I'm very excited to go back to healthcare, take what I learned to get back on my healthcare journey. So,
by the way, just as an observation, as you worked with others in the non-healthcare space, is there a way to generalize? Are these other non-health software industry companies, are they more advanced than in healthcare?
Oh, yeah. I mean, hands down, hands down. The challenge is different in healthcare. One, there's the ecosystem approach that we heard Cal talk about. The other challenge in healthcare is people's lives are at stake. So it's a very big difference between, hey, I'm going to get your bank account information, and I'm going to take your health and maybe your life, right? And those are two very different conversations. The regulations on the healthcare side are pretty dramatic, and the data model is always changing, right? Data model is pretty static in finance. Like, it is what it is, right? So I think that makes it harder. But I also think that it is ripe for disruption. And I think the work that Cal and his team at BrightInsight are doing, and for those of you that are working with Cal's team, recognize that the disruption happens now, and it happens by trying to bring all these different players together in the ecosystem. If I could, just to answer your question about what I learned by taking this detour to Workday, a couple of things. The first of those, and we heard it in Cal's opening remarks, and I know Jazz is gonna hit on this too. If you're not intimate with your customer, like if you don't walk their journey and understand what it's like to be them, it's going to be really hard to be successful in any software company you're trying to build. The second piece of that is building your platform or your product has to start with levels of abstraction and architecture. So the more you abstract the different layers of your product and build in the privacy, security, regulation at the ground up, then your opportunity to scale and add to that over time is far easier. And the last thing I learned was the services piece is really important. You can have a really great product, you can understand your customer really well, but if you don't have the component to help them understand how to use, take advantage, and help you continue to innovate your product, it's going to be really hard to maintain a competitive position.
I think those are really terrific lessons learned. I will say that I am also appreciative. It's been difficult for me as a clinician and a physician to understand why other industries are so far ahead of healthcare. And I think you stated a certain sense of complexity in healthcare that is a rate-limiting step. But I don't know, there's a certain passion that seems to lack to get it done. We've been very slow in healthcare, and I think it's one of the things I like about this company, this gathering, is that there is a lot of intellectual, emotional passion to get it right and get it done. Let me just ask you one last question at the beginning, and that is this observation that traditionally we've seen the role of IT in the CIO as being more of a cost center as opposed to a revenue enabler. How are you seeing that shift? Is that a real shift that is occurring that you can feel and touch?
It is a very real shift. Organization Forbes did a survey 2 years ago that while the data from the survey is dated, the context is right, and that is there are 4 different kinds of CIOs out there. There are transformers, there are advocates, there are servicers, and there are plumbers. The good news is the CIO population, Chief Digital Officer population, Chief Technology Officer, is really, that title is a little different in every company, and you have to understand who the person is behind the title to know, but are all starting to shift more to that transformer state. And I think there's a recognition that as companies will only be able to compete by digitizing, that the CIOs that are in that servicer plumber role recognize that they're probably not long in the job, or their relevance within the company is not going to be where they want it to be for it to be a rewarding career for them, and they're going to have to move over to the other side.
Good, thank you.
It's happening a lot.
Jazz, Tobaccowalla.
Yeah.
I did good.
You did good.
Thank you very much. You are if you didn't know it, you are the Senior Vice President and the first Chief Information and Digital Officer for Celgene. And formerly, you were VP and Chief Information Officer for Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. Let me just start and ask you to do a deep dive into pharma as an industry and this role. How do you describe the traditional role of what the CIO has meant inside of pharma companies?
I think I'm going to pick up on what both of you said, right? Pharma, you say, why are we behind? I'm probably going to get a few beatings over this, but partly I blame the CIOs. The ask of most CIOs in pharma was to run a clean shop where things didn't go down, where it was consistent and low cost. So almost everybody, and that was driven again, primarily because pharmas were going through a massive challenge in their research pipelines. So all costs had to come down, and IT was looked at as an enabling function where you just had to take costs down. So every CIO, we did it in our past lives. You said, you went offshore, you outsourced, you simplified, keep it sane, keep it safe. In that same and safe, though, we fell behind on the opportunity to drive innovation. And bringing that change then required, in all honesty, either CIOs to step up, put themselves into that awkward, difficult spot where you were challenging the norms of the organization, or organizations went out and hired CDOs who, the first generation, were marketing people, in essence, who came on board, got things started, but then couldn't sustain them because technology is such a core requirement of that digitization to work. Or then you started to see what's happening now, CTOs, CDOs, my role, which is a combination of CIO, CDOs, who are starting to become these transformers, advocates, game changers, if possible, within these companies. It's a changing environment, but it requires somebody to step up. Sometimes the company itself steps up, but usually we all know it requires a spark from somewhere within. I believe that's our role.
So as you look at pharma companies, device companies, they're operating in a very complex strategic environment. There are lots of pressures. Change is afoot, not only from new innovative competitors coming into the space, as Cal laid out, the dramatically changing reimbursement, which flips things upside down. And then, of course, there's the price negotiations that are occurring between the people that have to pay for these substances and the people that make them. In that regard, how does the conversation then, and maybe that if you've seen one company, you've seen one company, but in terms of your experience, What's the way in which that conversation around how to start to use and move to a digital environment, is that coming from the product people, is it coming from the CEO, or, as you say, is it coming from the CIOs?
Well, it's every pharma company, if you ask them about their core passion, right, will tell you the passion is the patient. And I think that's where truly the conversation starts. The challenge has been for most pharma companies is they've always been abstracted away from the patient. They've been, I don't know, maybe distracted, maybe circumstance-wise had to deal more with pricing or advocacy or marketing or research. But ultimately, the only true value proposition is the patient. I think that's what's starting to change, because this whole digitization or digital enablement is allowing for that connection with the patient to come to the fore. It's getting driven, in my opinion, it's not just the CIO, because if it was just one person, ultimately it'll fail. But you got to be careful also that what it isn't is a bunch of individuals with really, really good ideas, because then you get these sparks of innovation which ultimately don't lead to change, right? They are sparks of great innovation. So ultimately, it's got to be a combination. And I think somebody's got to lead the charge. I do believe those advocates can be the CIOs or the CDOs within those companies, but it's leading to that change on who you're truly focused on versus who you always said you were focused on.
Diana, how do you think how do you have that conversation with your colleagues who are still sort of maybe stuck in old models, and you're trying to get different parts of the organization to get into this internal ecosystem within the company, much less worrying about the external ecosystem to which you have to connect to?
Yeah, so I would actually start with a couple of the initiatives that we launched when Cal and I and the team worked together at Amgen. It started with, and I think this is the case in any company today, it starts with knowing who the people are in the organization who are going to be those early adopters, those crossing the chasm types, if you will. And they sit in all different places within, especially a life sciences company. You have early adopters who think about technology in research and development, in manufacturing, in your sales and marketing, and your sort of product pipeline development, commercialization team. Finding those individuals, and it can even start with a one-on-one conversation with an idea, something that's gained some exposure, some momentum within the company, and you start to stitch together that internal ecosystem of early adopters that are willing to lean in a little bit, and you take that to your CEO, right? You take that to the person who ultimately has to be backing this, because it's going to change the operating model of the company. Ultimately, to be successful, it will change the operating model of the company. And you get that one thing going, you show a little bit of success off of that, and pretty soon you'll get that next, it's like the first 10%, you get the next 20% who'll say, well, I want some of what that team's doing over there. How do I get access to that? And that starts that slow roll of momentum. But it's got to start with those internal thought leaders.
So Jazz, you got me convinced. You had this company conversation. You've told us, your peers, this is where the puck is going to be. We're going to have to skate to it. This is how it's all going to work. This is how it's going to affect our ROI. It's all wonderful. Now, do you make it yourself or do you buy it?
You walk a very fine line, right? And I say that because on one hand, again, I'll go back to the historical side where it was keep it all the same. In this space, if you're just like everybody else, you're not differentiated. And for me, if you're not going to use this digital space to be a disruptor, to be a differentiator, I mean, you might as well not be there, right? But at the same time, I think the entire conversation last night, this morning around ecosystem is truly, truly key. So it's that fine line where you want to be part of a broader ecosystem, because you truly cannot build it all yourself, but there has to be a component of it that's differentiated. So whether you're differentiating it on a product basis, on a user experience basis, on a who you're targeting basis, I think is important. But you don't have to, going back to Diana's point, every layer in that space, you better not be building yourself because you'll never get there, right? It'll be years in, and all you would have built is a little silo which neither the patient, the payer, not the provider will ever want to use. So it is finding that fine line, but you better be differentiated.
Dan, I'd like to get your sort of thoughts on that as well, because at the end of the day, the biggest frustration and the ugliest word in all of this is interoperability, is synergy. It's everybody's kind of got their own thing, and you're so proud of it, and yet it doesn't connect in. So this dilemma of being unique, having special algorithms that really are yours, and you're terrific at it, yet how do you fit into to the rest of the stream that's already flowing, and how do you deal with that challenge?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question directly, but I would like to use an analogy, and I'll do this for the benefit of the Google Cloud folks that are in the room here. If we take this conversation back to the days when CIOs were all about having the best data centers, right? The most sparkling data centers with the most power and wattage to racks and all these wonderful things. And then we started to see the emergence of public cloud infrastructure. And there was a real fear about moving your company's enterprise data to a public cloud infrastructure until that network effect that Don was talking about last night really started to take off. And all of a sudden, the conversation inside the company changed to be, can we, with our scarce resources that are being pulled in so many different directions, truly secure, make it compliant, as well as these really, really talented teams that are operating at scale, and the more customers they bring on, the better they get, the more we benefit. So I think the network effect associated with not building it yourself, breaking down the fragmentation is the draw. And as more players come to that space, the more value and benefit there is to be in that space. And then you can say, hey, what's the icing on the cake? That's going to be mine. I can get to the data, do what I need to do with it.
So why did you say you weren't going to answer me directly? I mean, that was like the best possible answer that you can have, because you differentiate by being able to connect to everything, connecting everything together, and yet having special icings on the cake that sort of make you difference. I like that. Now, you said that if you're going to be one of the differentiating factors that you described, as you were kind of going through that, one was security. Aijaz, how do you sort of see this notion of privacy and security? Everybody today is terrified outside of healthcare of being hacked every second. I get phished every time I open up my cell phone, it seems now. Why in the world should anybody who's an average person trust this industry that it can take care of the most sensitive of my data going forward?
Well, why should they trust I'll get to that one. I think the bigger question you ask is there really any privacy left anymore, right? So while everybody complains about it, I think most people have already given it up, right? I think the difference, though, is the companies that are now looking for that data from patients, et cetera, are in a different place and are in a different ecosystem than most of the other providers. What I mean by that is, if you're a consumer company, you're always trying to convince whoever's coming to your site, your app, whatever, to buy one more, to buy something that's adjacent, basically build your base with that customer. As a pharma company, that's not what we do. If you're on our drug, it's not like I can suddenly sell you 3 more drugs. It has nothing to do, that's not the relationship we ultimately have with our patient. So what is the relationship we have with our patient? The relationship we have with our patients ultimately is about getting them to a better, healthier state, which means that respect and trust is paramount. So why would you trust us? Because it's the only way we can ever work with you, right? I mean, biopharma companies have an interesting dilemma. We're not the most trusted resource when people are just looking for information. However, we are the most trusted resource when you're on one of our products. So there's this interesting switch that takes place instantly in a patient's mind as soon as you're on our product. Well, our goal is how do we get you to the earlier stage where we understand in the spaces we're in what that patient journey is, what you're going to go through to trust us through that process. So for us, it's just, I mean, I can't imagine a world where that trust is not maintained because there's no value in breaking that trust. You know, for other companies, there may be value. For us, there just isn't.
Observation?
I would agree with Jazz, and I should go back to what Heidi said earlier. If Heidi, you are in a relationship with a life science company that's providing a medication that's making it possible for you to live as normal a life as possible, and you've said, hey, I've got some of this other data just about my day-to-day coexistence, that if you had it, maybe you could titrate my dose, maybe my regimen could be completely different, maybe there'd be a different formulation, a different delivery system, and I'd be open to hearing your recommendations on that. I'm going to give you my data. I do think that's where the trust comes in. The one time that gets misused, right? The one time that gets misused, that trust is lost, but that happens in almost every industry. So I think the challenge with that is that word keeps coming up over and over again as the ecosystem is there's so many different places where that data has to be fed from. We're still building that. BrightInsight's building
Well,
that.
Jazz, you've actually used a couple of concepts that I want to push you on a little bit. At one moment, you sort of talked a little bit about a relationship with consumers. And is now the biopharma company model going to be a relationship with something called a consumer? Is the relationship with something called a patient, which is what you've given us, or is this a relationship with a physician or a healthcare system? You got three different potentials here. How do you sort of see those?
I for the biopharma side and the company I'm with right now, which is primarily focused on in the oncology space, it's never about the consumer, right? But it is about the patient and the ecosystem that supports that patient. Because a patient, unfortunately, if you go in to an oncologist and you're diagnosed with cancer, believe you me, the only thing you've heard in that conversation is you have cancer. You haven't heard anything else the oncologist has said to you. Your journey actually starts post that conversation. And it's not a journey you take alone, right? So while that patient, not the consumer, the patient is our focus, you can't just focus on the patient because that, again, back to the ecosystem that surrounds that patient is really what's going to get that patient through that journey. That's where the relationship has to exist.
Let me challenge you to your thoughts on that. I mean, at the end of the day, the patient may say, look, my primary allegiance is to this thing called the patient-physician relationship. And this pharma company is either I really appreciate them for helping my physician and integrated care delivery team be very effective, or I appreciate my direct relationship with my pharma company that seems like they care about me as a person. Which would you, as you're in your internal corporate leadership strategic planning session, which of those two are you saying as a CIO, I'm focused more on?
Boy, that is a hard question to answer. I agree with Jazz. I think it always has to start with the patient journey. And understanding based on the disease state, therapeutic area, what the specific product is, whether it's a drug, whether it's a device, understanding who are all the players in the patient journey, and how do we equip all of those players to win. And you'd asked a question earlier where it occurred to me that the payer is definitely a focus area for life sciences. The physician is a focus area. The nurse, the study nurse, right, is a focus area. The regulator is a focus area. And so for the company to truly understand the patient in the center and what all has to work around the patient and what it looks like to make it so that as many of those players as possible can win is where I think the life sciences industry needs to be focused. Whether they can all win is an open question. But.
And as you respond, I want to throw in another variable, because the payer is now increasingly also the provider. So that has merged with vertical and horizontal integration. So now you start to have a whole nother segment of people that are saying, I am demanding this comprehensive relationship with the patient through all the stuff I used to do as the payer, but also because I'm also integrating that as being a provider.
Right. So we go back again to that, where is it differentiated versus where is it common part of it, right? So for the patient, it needs to be a unique experience, because as an individual, that's a unique disease that you're concerned about, right? So you have to provide that uniqueness, because it's very different if you're under chronic care, acute care. A reminder for me to get my statin pill is very, very different than what I'm going through if I'm undergoing chemotherapy or I'm under oncology care. But for a provider, you don't want it to be so unique an experience, going back to Cal's idea, that says, I have to completely go away from my normal mode of operation to deal with whatever product you as a pharma company are providing to me. Take it a step further. As a payer, now it's gone even further. I want it to be completely common. What I'm really interested about is am I getting value for my dollar, right? So that's that abstraction layer. You've got to have that uniqueness to the patient. You've got to have commonality to the provider, and you've got to have a value proposition to the payer. And that's the change process, or the uniqueness of the model that we have to go after.
Tough job. Questions, please. Floor is open.
Thank you both for your insightful comments on technology. Joe Fleming, Allergan. I lead R&D IT. Can today's pharmaceutical industry be disrupted from within?
Can today's pharmaceutical industry be disrupted from within? And you want to indicate who you are assigning the disruptor job?
Well, these leaders here I think are in a good spot.
So we're asking for CIOs to be disruptors from within.
Yes. Short answer. I'll expand on it a little bit. They have to be, or they're going to get overrun, right? If you're not part of that group that's leading the disruption, because pharma companies at the end of the day have a pretty darn critical role in this entire process, because that's where key innovation on therapy, on cures potentially, look at the whole cell therapy space, is coming from. And I don't think you can survive exclusively on the innovation of your product alone, which is what's always been the value proposition for companies. It's gotten a step further. So I think those steps further, that disruption does have to come from within.
Wow. Did you want, Diane?
Yeah, I would say my answer is I don't know, and here's the reason why. I do think there's a real drive and motivation within the life sciences industry now to change. I think there's just a recognition that change needs to happen. I think there's also recognition, as Jazz says, that a lot of the innovation that will drive that change is coming from outside the industry. So how open is the life sciences company to partnering with people outside to make that change? And there's a fundamental economics issue at play here, and that is, we were talking about this actually on the bus ride here, is Wall Street shareholders are still looking for the blockbuster. And in an age where medicine, healthcare becomes more personalized, there's no such thing as a blockbuster. And so I think we're in this conundrum between looking for the next company with the next blockbuster and figuring out how you reward the company that can actually make smaller lot sizes, more personalized delivery systems, scale to that model. and be successful on a dispersed volume state. I'm just not sure that the reward system is there for public companies to play that way just yet. And there's got to be more of this pressure, right, to make that ultimately happen.
Jez, I'm glad you made the point you did, and we'll have another panel later that will start talking about beyond the molecule, and I think that those wraparound services are going to be important. Dan, I think that what I've certainly learned in my experience is that, though, again, because the context and landscape, the strategic landscape is shifting so quickly, that it really is going to have to be that ability to give the purchaser more than just the drug. It's going to be some of those answers. And of course, we're going to ask, I'm paying for value. If I'm reimbursing the delivery system for value, I want to reimburse you for value. So it's not just the molecule, but we'll come back to those later today.
Anna Kravitz, Merck. So the question I have is, do you think that pharma, biotech companies building those digital solutions, around the pill and so on, are like, automobile companies building GPS into their system? And if so, should we start thinking about ourselves and our services a little bit differently? And, they are now thinking of themselves as mobility companies, not, automobile companies. And if we do that, right, are we, general outcome delivery, the new way of delivering therapy companies, how will the rest of the ecosystem accept and challenge us? Because this space, it's very integrated, very divided, a lot of players that, have a lot of at stake, their business models, their revenue models, a lot of incumbents that are, very protective of how things work now. Would love to hear your thoughts about that.
And as you do that, really through the prism of also of information and data and analytics. So as you sort of think about that, let's stay on theme in terms of the prism that you're looking at this.
Well, I think if you're looking for solutions at the end of the day, even as a pharma company, that are solely for a singular product in your space, then I think you are down that GPS in the car problem. But if you're building it with the idea that you're enabling an ecosystem, I think you've got a significant chance of success, right? So again, I'll go back to my disruptor side of the conversation. You can look at it as an incremental add to your product, or you can look at it as an entirely different avenue of business. So as a CIO, CDO, leader in a pharma company, you can think of it just as an adjacency, or you can think of it as an entirely new opportunity. If you're looking at it as an entirely new opportunity, I think as pharma companies, you've got a head start over a pure disruptor that might be coming into this place, because you've got significant, going back to the point, significant data, right, that most other companies would not have about these journeys. So it's all a question of how you're positioning that solution you're building.
All right.
I just want to extend the thought. My name is Mark Mattson. I'm with a company called MC10. We make multi-point wearables for clinical research. So I had that exact same conversation with top 20 pharma last week, 5, 6 around the table, where we're developing innovations around gait and movement and MS or Huntington's disease, and everyone at the table, we're doing the same thing. So I said, so you're going to develop an algorithm and have an understanding of gait that you present to FDA, and then you're going to do one that you're going to do with FDA, and we have ours, and we're working with academics who are helping inform this whole data stream, and we're not going to work together on this. And everyone said, well, it's my data, it's my data. So I think we all have to challenge ourselves on how do we collectively make this ecosystem possible. Because I've had conversations where a top 10 pharma will say, we compete on medicines, not on algorithms. And then we have other people that say, this algorithm will inform a whole segment of our organization. So having a proprietary hold over that will give us longer term value than just that one and done. So there's this tension between all of that and making the ecosystem play. And my challenge is always to have our customers think about the future and where this is going to be in 10, 15 years. It's not going to be about your product or my product or anything in 15 years. It's about how do we inform treatment decisions and help our patients get greater insights from how these treatments work in the home.
Whoever wants to comment, we just note also that we are going to have a very exciting panel also later around FDA and how they and how we sort of look at that. I will tell you though that just one observation is that as we, if you think about the fact that the physician ultimately has got to be the person who's in the middle of all of this, that proprietary algorithm is going to have to somehow wind up in a journal article somewhere that convinces somebody that this is actually for real. And so all that militancy around, you know, this is me, mine, and it's going to be a black box, that might be a big challenge if the journal article doesn't allow any reader to understand what the heck is this thing. But I don't know, that maybe I'm overly concerned about that. We'll get you a comment, and then somebody named Cal wants to get in too. You want to jump in now? Go ahead.
I was going to ask a question around the people side, the talent side. So, you know, we talked a lot about the transformations that need to happen. How are you guys thinking about this at a company level, but specifically from a CIO IT perspective, you know, how you're going to transform your talent base?
Yeah, it's a great question, and clearly coming from a company like Workday, ranked number 4 in the Fortune 100 best places to work, it is a focus of every single leader, manager in the company every single day. And I think the key there for those of you who are looking to acquire talent in this space is to go back to the do I buy it or do I build it? So what can you, through partnerships in this ecosystem, gain access to, ergo BrightInsight, to say, okay, I'm going to let this organization tackle the whole platform aspect of stitching together the things that I want to do for the patients. And then I'm gonna think about where I do want to differentially bring in this software engineering, data science talent within my organization. And then to compete effectively, you have to give these people the resources, the tools, the career development opportunities. So there has to be a place for them to go within your company. Yep. And there needs to be a top-down commitment within the company that you're building out a space for that kind of talent to come. And I'm seeing that, you know, having a front row seat to CIOs for the last 3.5 years who were on their digital transformation journeys, what I saw at the end of that 3.5 years, in contrast to the beginning when those conversations were just happening, was this pivot in the minds of CIOs in partnership with their CHROs and their CFOs to say, no longer can we figure out how to keep the laptops for 4 to 5 years before we replace them, the one-size-fits-all collaboration tool that works 50% of the time, but let's create an environment here that really fuels the productivity of the organization, which is make us far more attractive to that scarce talent we're all trying to go after.
And as you think through that, and just tying it back to the previous question, so you've got to worry about AI, machine learning. You've got a lot of new skill sets. Are those within these companies now? Are those the things that you buy and then integrate? How do you sort of see that deep level that you're trying to get at in your question?
You've got to be selective because you're not going to be able to do all of those in every place. So for example, within the AI machine learning space, we focus that effort at the moment primarily within our research space because the ability to start doing sort of in silico research, the value gain for a biopharma company is just beyond belief, right? Before it can even get to the lab, if we can help shape, guide, so that's where we made the first biggest investment as opposed to on the commercialization or the manufacturing space. And then there are places where you go and you go look for help, right? I mean, as a pharma company, you're never ever going to build it all yourself. You'd be crazy to try to build it all yourself. So you go selective. But I think to Diana's point is, but your mix of IT talent is changing dramatically. Unfortunately, at a time where it's changing dramatically for everybody else. So now it becomes a true competition in the marketplace as to where earlier on you were worried about Workday skills or SAP skills and you could outsource them and you could find an offshore partner. That's not what you're primarily focused on. Those are important. They have to run this sort of baseline. But now it is. It's the AI space, it's the ML space, where again, if you're going to be a differentiator, it can't be something that you're just going outside and saying, somebody else help me.
Last question is, in terms of scalability, does it matter that the company is now reaching for global reach or primarily focused US?
I think every company is looking at it globally, but again, given the change, the difference in regulation, et cetera, you start in the markets where you have the most sort of openness to innovation, which the US certainly has in some areas. But then there are other markets like in Europe, et cetera, because they're single payer markets, you get very different access, very almost instant value propositions because there's just one organization to convince of your value proposition. So it is a global marketplace, but you can't approach it, on a one-size-fits-all model by any stretch.
Great. As we close out, Diana, I want to give both of you an opportunity, when you go first, to take a couple of minutes. Out of everything that you have said, this entire conversation since you've been here, is there anything that you didn't say that you really wish that you had said, or is there something that you said that you really love and you want to say it again?
I think the one thing I didn't say and I wish I would have said is whenever you're asked to sit in a chair up here, it makes it look like you know it all. And I clearly don't. And I would also say the more I learn, the more I realize there's so much more that I need to learn, and staying curious and recognizing that there's always someone out there who's probably figured it out and learned a lesson that you're learning right now. Look for those people, connect with them, try to learn from them. Super important on this journey.
Terrific.
I'm going to echo that. Be curious, but be humble would be sort of my way of looking at it. There are an incredible amount of smart people out there. Just because you may be in an environment where you're competitive doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity to learn from each other. And it goes back to companies like BrightInsight where you have this opportunity to collaborate at a level where you usually don't, right? Don't think of the world. My point is, don't think of it as your product may be proprietary, but your opportunity isn't. Right, so go at it with a different attitude.
All right, thank you. Will you give them a round of applause, please?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.